Welcome back to the Boring Everyday Car Channel. Today we're going to continue working on our 2004 Grand Am GT. Now we're going to drop the drivetrain and the cooling system out of it so we can take a better look at that frame rail on the other side. And then we're going to change it. But it is a little bit worse than we saw the last time. Let's get started.
We'll start with getting the exhaust unbolted first. We're just going to unbolt the entire system from the manifold. Do this before we do the fuel lines in case we need to heat them. We don't want fuel everywhere. It came off pretty nice, no heating required. We'll unbolt the power steering cooler from the bottom of the body. I have a tendency to forget these and test just how strong those hoses are. Once that's disconnected, we can unbolt our subframe from the body. Now these aren't coming out so nice, so we're going to run them out a little bit, then run them back in, then run them out a little further, then run them back in. We're just going to keep doing that until we clean up all the rust and the threads so we don't break the bolt off in there. There's a little plate, so you do want to keep the bolt on one side of that plate tight until you free up the other side. Otherwise that plate will end up spinning around in there and it makes putting it back together quite the pain. Now we can unplug the downstream oxygen sensor. That's going with our exhaust. We're going to unbolt our transmount. We're only doing this because we need to get this engine and trans off of our subframe eventually, and it's easier to do it now while it's up above us. If we weren't changing our subframe later on, we wouldn't have to take those bolts out. The bolts for our subframe on the driver's side are just as rusted, so we're going to work those back and forth so we don't break them off in the little plate. All the southern viewers are now hyperventilating because of the sight of all this rust, but up here this is just a normal day. This car is actually pretty clean. Down south you'd consider it rotted out. Now we can pull the bolts out of our front transmount. I use my hand to shield it as I'm taking it out because these have a tendency to fill with water and then you end up getting a rusty water shower, and I prefer to avoid that if I can. Now we'll pull our wheels off, the ones that the experts say are wrong. These are available 99 to 05, not just 99 and 2000 or whatever they said. Now we can disconnect our steering shaft. We'll lift the boot up and we can get the 11mm bolt that holds the clamp together. And we can slide the steering shaft up, disconnect it from the rack and pinion. Set it off to the side. Now we can disconnect our brake line, break the fitting loose. Amazing it actually came loose without heat. And we'll spin that out of there. Turn the wheels a little bit so we can get to the bracket for the brake hose. We're just going to leave the bracket and the brake hose together. We'll set that off to the side. Now we do need to take one brake line off of the ABS module. This is the brake line that runs along the frame rail and over to the right front. It's easier just to take this off than it is to try to fish that line out of there. That'll go with our subframe. Now we can disconnect our ABS module. Then we can unbolt our ABS module from the subframe. We'll just let the module hang on the brake lines from the rear and the master cylinder. They're mounted in little plastic hangers, so they'll just hang there when we take the subframe out. We can remove the side transmount. There's a nut and a bolt, and I don't feel like walking to get the wrench, so I'll just use my Kung Fu grip to hold the nut on the backside. And we'll run it out of there. If you pry up on the transmission, it will come out, or we'll just do it the hard way. Since I didn't want to walk to the pry bar and the ratcheting wrench was right here, we'll just spin it the rest of the way out. Now we can pull a splash shield out of the passenger side. There's just a bunch of little Christmas trees that hold it in. We'll pop those out. I guess I could leave it in there and see just how strong those Christmas trees are. We'll unbolt our brake line. We're going to leave the line and the hose all together. Disconnect our AC. Oh man, now I'm going to glow in the dark. Disconnect the other AC line. Before all the experts get up in arms over the hole in the ozone I just made, I discharged the AC system. It was about 20 degrees cooler, so when the temperature rises, so does the pressure in a sealed system. That's what you saw there. There was actually no Freon left in the system. It was actually just air. We can disconnect all our coolant lines from the overflow to our radiator and our engine. Then we can pull our cruise unit out so we can get to our engine mount. Unbolt the mount from the engine. We can unbolt the mount from the lower rail. I have to take the bracket off the top because it's kind of wedged in there. Usually you can leave the bracket on the top, but it didn't work out this time. Now we can pull our throttle cables off. GM bends this bracket over after they put the cables on, so we have to bend it back. And just press the tabs and slide the cables out. Unclip the one, and then unclip the other. We can disconnect our evap line and pull our vacuum line out for our brake booster. Now it's time to get the wiring out of our way. We're going to pull the top off the fuse box. That'll allow us to get this power cable off. Now we'll put the top back on the fuse box so we don't lose it. The tab on the bottom you just push up and it slides out of its bracket. And then we'll open up the bottom of it, flip it over. And now we can unbolt all these wiring harnesses and unplug a fuse. Pop all the plugs out of the bottom. There's one vacuum line in there, so we'll separate that. Pull the rest of the plugs out. And there's one left, we might as well just take that out. Now our fuse box is free, we can just go throw that in the pile. We'll unbolt our bracket for our fuse box from the tower. And then we're going to try and unbolt it from the rail, but up here in Illinois, that's not always possible. It had one of those round-headed bolts, so I have one of those turbo sockets. It's basically got little splines on there, and as you loosen up the bolt, it tightens up the spline and gets it free. Then we can put a 9mm on there and get the rest of the bolt out. Those turbo sockets are a great invention. I don't know how I did this before. Yeah, I do. Used to pound a socket on there until it fit and then take it off. Took a lot more time. It didn't always work. We gotta fish this out of here around our extra cable for what used to be a system in the car. We'll end up taking that out of there. We're not putting the system back in. Now we can disconnect the shift cable, pop it off of its little bracket, pull out the safety, squeeze the tabs, and pull the cable out of its bracket. Set it off to the side. And we can reach way back in here, pop little safeties off of our fuel lines. Hopefully not drop them down into Narnia. Although they are pretty easy to find when we take the engine out, which is sometimes what you have to do to find them. We'll slide our little plastic fuel line disconnect tools on our fuel lines and release the tabs. Those are available in my Amazon store if you're looking for a set for yourself. Got one. Get the return line now. Try not to lose our little plastic tool. And we'll tuck these fuel lines up into the engine so they're not getting snagged when we're dropping the engine out. Now we're going to disconnect the PCM and the harness that comes in from the firewall. And then we'll fish those wires out of the firewall. I'm going to be daring. I didn't tie the steering wheel. Just going to hope that nobody turns it, because it will ruin the clock spring since it's no longer connected to our rack and pinion. Pull the grommet out of the firewall first. And once that's out, we'll just start feeding them through. And of course they're going to get snagged on everything, but they'll come out eventually. There's one PCM plug, and there's the other. Set that off on top of the engine. Now we can disconnect our heater lines. Just squeeze the tabs and the quick disconnects. Tuck those in the back so they don't get snagged on anything when we're dropping the engine. And we're going to start unbolting our subframe. 4 bolts. The rear ones go through the control arms, the front ones just go through the subframe. And our cooling and everything goes with. Lift it up a little bit, and we can disconnect our struts. And if my calculations are correct, I should be able to get this out of here. We do have to be careful. That ABS module will like to get stuck on stuff, and so did our exhaust. So we'll just move it around a little bit until it comes out. And we don't have to stop because I did remember to take that power steering cooler line off. This is usually the part where the engine starts tipping forward because that cooler line is still connected. And that's what the inside of our frame rail looks like. And I was not expecting it to be bent all the way back to the transmount. So there really is no sectioning. We're going to have to change this entire frame rail anyway. I had planned on it, so it really doesn't matter. That's the side we saw before. This side doesn't look too bad. Couldn't really tell it was kinked where it was. That's where it ends. We're going to change the whole thing.
So we have our used front end, straight from Scott's Grand Am Emporium. I'd like to thank them for sponsoring this video. So we have all of our inner structure that we're going to need and our subframe. So let's get it apart.
This front end came off of an 03 4-door GT with the SCT package. The hood actually went on my white car, and I sold the spoiler. So the SCT package is essentially gone. Actually, so is the rest of the car. This is all I have left. So we're going to pull our fender off, which is a little rusty at the bottom. This was an Indiana car, so it has just the right amount of rust to put on our Chicago car. But not so much that it's totally junk. Pull the prop rod out of here. Just slides out of its little bushing. Unbolt our hood latch. Disconnect the hood cable. Now we can start drilling out our spot welds. The ones we can drill all the way through, we're just going to start off with an 1/8 inch drill bit. Then we'll go over them with our 5/16 drill bit. If we need the panels underneath, and not the panels on top, we'll just grind the spot welds out. So that's what we're doing now. That way we don't have any holes we don't need. Then we'll unbolt our subframe so we can get it out of our way, get the rest of our spot welds, and get our pieces apart. We're just going to use our Scott powered forklift. Get it out of the way. Set it off to the side. Now we can continue drilling out all our spot welds for our frame rail. Go back over all of our spot welds with our 5/16 drill. And now we can set our front end down since we drilled everything on the bottom. And we'll start drilling the stuff on the top. We need to get the little stud out of here, so we're going to take our time. I'm going to use a ratcheting wrench instead of an impact on here so I don't break it. It's kind of a pain to try to get the rest of it out of there when you break them off. With a little patience, we don't have to drill anything out, except for some more spot welds. And we'll grind a couple on the top of this rail, since we do need the piece that's in the middle of these two rails. So we'll grind the bottom and the top. That'll leave our piece in the center untouched. Now we can start separating all of our spot welds. Just hammer a breaker in there. We're going to be able to change this whole front end, and it's actually only going to be 2 pieces. The upper tie bar, the lower reinforcement, the rail, the apron, the upper rail on the left side, that's all going to be 1 piece, and then we're just going to have 1 little end for the bumper there on the right side. We need to get that out so that we can get that lower reinforcement off. We'll just keep breaking out what spot welds we need out. And I could go get the air chisel, but that's like 4 steps away, so I'm just going to hammer away this upper rail. Sometimes if you damage the parts you don't need, it makes it easier to save the parts you do. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to fold it out of my way so then I get a straight shot with this upper apron here. That way I don't have to worry about tearing it up. We'll get the bottom of the apron. It is pinched between the tower and the rail. Then unbolt our hood latch support. And try not to drop the nuts down in our reinforcement. Success. Now we can take off the first of our two pieces, just this little bumper end. Just gonna hammer it back and forth until we break all the spot welds out of it. There's really no good way to get a breaker behind it because the ends are folded over. So it'll give up eventually. Now we can get the actual air chisel out because I felt like taking those extra few steps. We're going to cut the outside of this rail out, get it out of our way. That way we can get straight at these welds that are inside the rail. We'll be able to drill them all the way through and then weld them up from the outside. There's just no easy way to get a drill in there. We got lucky, centered them perfectly, and they popped right off. No breaker required. Now to separate our rail from the rest of the frame rail, I'm just going to use our air chisel with a big flat bit and just let the vibration knock all those welds loose. Pretty thick stuff, so it does crack right off of there. Good thing, because getting the breaker behind there is not easy. I'm just going to go all the way around it until they all start to break free. I'll usually drill them somewhat centered, they come right out. A little more hammering on the inside of the frame rail, break those spot welds loose, and also see how much rust we can add to the pile on the floor. And now we're going to air chisel out our tower, then we can get a breaker in there to get the top of the rail loose. Or with any luck, it'll just break loose as we're air chiseling out the tower. If not, the rail will be disconnected and we'll be able to remove that little strip that was left with our breaker when it's sitting on the floor. Much easier to get to than trying to work in this little confined space. But most of it popped out. We're going to cut the inside of it. And we'll flip it down because I'm not tall enough to lift it off. We'll set the front of it on the jack stand. That way it's not laying down on the parts we're trying to take off. And we'll give it a little wiggle and pull and see what happens. Okay, we'll violently shake it. And our second piece is off. We're going to put it in just like that.
So that's it for this video. We were able to get our engine and trans out. We got our parts all cut out, ready to go in. Next time, we'll get this all straightened out, cut it off, put our piece up. So, thanks for watching. See you soon.